He's kicking it off in a second, so
I'll kick it off whenever you're ready.
I'm ready. We just had to resolve that. Hi,
Hey, I'm Rob.
Rob and Patrick.
Yeah, are you the speaker?
I know your name from somewhere.
You could. So, yeah, circuitously, there's a couple of, well, there's one of the Rob Humphreys in the area. No S on the end.
Okay.
So, SEO or recruiter, which,
SEO.
okay, yeah, so that's me. So,
Okay.
Yeah. How long you been at IBM?
3.5 years or so.
Cool. And what'd you do before that?
I was at The Design
Oh, okay. All right.
for a little bit,
Like
about a year and a half or so.
He learned
everything and then went off to IBM and they flew. He knows I'm joking.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to grab a beer.
Go for it.
You got a ticket?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I'm on. Yeah, just go on and run, give them the ticket, they'll give it with you if we want.
Where's JR? He might need to switch the thing. I don't know. Let me ask. Do you need to switch the thing, or we're good?
Okay, he's live, so we're good. Let me get Rob, and then I'll switch it.
I already told Rob we're ready to go.
Is he going to introduce you? I don't introduce myself. I'm Patrick fucking Stox.
But we'll see how his intro is. I might have to improve on it.
Oh, hey guys. I'm JR.
No, Rob will be introducing, not JR.
Oh, Rob will sell you.
Although JR said I was one of the top 5 technical SEOs in the US today, so I will take that.
In person or like in a...
On Twitter.
Oh. Was Paul number 1?
I don't know that he made a list.
Oh.
He said he was number 2, so. I hope that puts me number 1.
I convinced my company, so search discovery.
I'm possibly live, so if you want to talk after.
Good call. Good call.
So I can get a potentially more cool picture in the bitches.
Hey Keith, are we live?
Hey, how's it going, Leslie? Oh, clicker. Sit in front of the speaker. Just move over a little, or the projector. There you go. It's perfect.
And his name is Jairus. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight for our, I don't know, 5th one of the year Beer and SEO meetup. Tonight we are going to be hearing from Patrick Stox. Before I tell you about his presentation, I just want to take care of some housekeeping. First of all, social media. I know some of you guys are on social media. We would love it if you started tweeting out some pictures, Instagram, Twitter. I don't...
That's what.
You know who to ask. What is the hashtag here tonight?
Beer and SEO.
Okay, hashtag. It will be up here next time. Hashtag beer and SEO. Thank you very much. Okay, well, first thing we want to do is thank all of our sponsors. Go Fish Digital and Adapt Partners are our gold sponsors. We thank them so much for the free beer. Let's give them a round of applause if we can.
Woo!
And we also have another sponsor, Ecom Integrate. That is Keith back there helping us out every time we put one of these on. We want to thank all of our sponsors because we really couldn't put this together without them. So we also want to talk about an event next week. Raleigh SEO Meetup does their annual conference, SEO conference. It's a full day. It's downtown. It is a full day of just talks from local people people on SEO and other digital marketing. There's panels. I think a few of us in the room are even going to be on those panels. There are tickets still available. And do we have a discount code, Frank? I didn't even know. I'll use somebody else's discount code. Let's just go ahead and get them some money off. SEO Meetup is a discount code. I don't even know what the discount is, but when you plug it in, you'll see. Okay, so tonight you're going to hear from one of our local celebrities. I do call him a local celebrity. The guy is invited to speak nationally, internationally. He is published on Search Engine Land, all sorts of online publications. He's from IBM. I don't know the correct title there, though. Technical SEO. Okay. He is a technical SEO, but we all know he's more than that. So, with no further ado, here you go, Patrick.
Hey everyone. Can everyone hear me all right? Up more? How do I jump? Or don't stand in front of the speaker? Is that going to be bad? I don't know.
How's that?
Test, test. All right. So, as Rob said, I'm Patrick Stox. I'm a technical SEO at IBM. I don't even know what my official title is. I am here as myself, not at IBM. That is my legal disclaimer. The legal literally makes me say. I'm one of the organizers for this event, also Raleigh SEO, the Raleigh SEO conference. All the friends who must have worked for that this year. As Rob said, I do speak at a lot of events, SMX, PubCon, spoke in Germany recently, spoke in India, China last year. I also judge a lot of the search awards, US Search Awards, UK Search Awards, Interactive Marketing Awards. This is way more than I ever say about myself. My wife was like, you have to say more about who you are. I think half the people here know who I am. The other half don't really care. I also moderate the Tech SEO subreddit, which is really awesome. We do a lot of AMAs up there. We've had John Mueller, Gary from Google, gotten a lot of really good information out of that. And I'm going to go right ahead into this because I have so much to talk about. We are not going to get through all of this. We have a crash course in technical SEO. We're going to cover some of the basics first. Homepage SEO. These are most of the factors for an individual page. Now, I will say the biggest factor for your page, 100% is content. Getting your content aligned with what people search for, what other top pages talk about, what they rank for, just generally what's driving value to people, what people want to know. But there are some important elements on page that will help you rank better. The title tag is basically what your page is about. You want to sell yourself. Why am I going to click this? This is what shows at the top in a Google search result and also like the top of a browser. Some interesting things about this, there's no character limit. People will recommend that you keep it short, probably a good idea, but there's no official cutoff for this length. If you're bad enough, Google's actually just going to rewrite your title tag for you. Or if you leave it blank, they'll write one for you. But this is one of the most important on-page factors, I would say. One of the reasons I will not give you a limit is the limits are different. Desktop limit is different from mobile limit. It varies by device. There's a lot of nuance to this. If you really want to test it, just write something or keep it safe, maybe 50, 55 characters. Don't do this. I pulled this from a Raleigh dentist. Raleigh dentist, sedation dentistry, dentist, Raleigh NC. Raleigh NC dentist is what that says. That is called keyword stuffing. I think I had to go to page 2 to find this. There's a reason they're not on page 1. Maybe do this. This is really interesting. You can use Math Sans bold Unicode and actually get a bold result in your title tag. Not many people know about that. It may not work for a long time. I will share the slides after. There's a link down there. It'll tell you exactly how to do it. Then you have your meta description. This is what shows under your title tag in the search results. I don't think I actually took a screenshot, but it's the 2-3 lines that show under that. Actually, there's one on the next one, I remembered. This is not actually a ranking factor. People focus on this more because it's a chance to sell yourself. It's a chance to get people to tell people what your page is about, tell them what problem you're going to solve for them, tell them about a discount you have, anything like that. Google can also ignore this one. They can write you one. They will write you one a lot. If you leave one blank, they'll write you one. And there's no real limit on this either. And this one is important on the limit because technically you can have a longer title tag than people think. And I'll show you that in a second. It will typically highlight the search result, whatever you search for. There's a caveat to that where if your text is hidden by default, like if it's hidden behind a tab or some other thing, it doesn't show. We don't know if that's actually a feature or a bug. It actually helps in troubleshooting things sometimes. Like if it shows but it doesn't necessarily highlight, it will basically indicate that it's there. When I was talking about what to look for, that sometimes these might be a different length, it's because of rich results. These are the things that show sometimes at the top, sometimes over on the right, typically owned by Wikipedia on informational queries. But they can actually tell you when another result might be eligible in the set. So a normal title tag is kind of like this. This one, down here we've got, hey, suddenly we have 4 lines instead of 2. But why is that? And it's because it's eligible in the rich result set, the featured snippet set. If you do this, search the same thing and minus whatever was the original result. I'll show you. MichelinMan.com was the original result. Another site shows up there. This is the second most eligible snippet. This is the third most eligible snippet. I just did a minus site:, for the second site. If you take a look at a few of these, you'll realize they all say pretty much the same thing in a different way. If you want to be eligible for that featured snippet, a lot of it depends on where you rank, but some of it depends on, do I even have a good answer for this? What's in here will tell you whether you have a good answer or not. And generally, if you want the 3-4 lines on a featured snippet, I've actually seen up to 6 lines showing in a search result. It's good to have something that's eligible to show. Have a good answer for whatever the query is. There's also a tag called no snippet. We'll talk a little bit about this later, but basically it shows no meta description. I actually do that just for fun, but I've seen this used as a way to stand out. I know companies have tested it to say, hey, my search result looks different than everyone else's. Some people will be like, well, why is that? Click. May not be the people you want, but still interesting. There's heading tags. This is basically a logical order on your page of your site sections. It's generally, these are what are above your paragraphs, your sections of content on the page, and they're usually H1 through H6. Now, there are some SEO myths around this one. Everyone will tell you, don't have multiple H1 tags. That's allowed by HTML5 since about 2014. It's not actually a problem. Even if you don't have an H1, if your highest is an H2, neither Google nor Bing actually care. It's more about what is in there rather than this is an H1, then an H2, H3. It could be H3, then H1. Like, it really doesn't matter the order. It doesn't matter which ones are there. It's more about, are you identifying what this section is about? This is the code H1 here. The Beer and SEO Meetup group. Images are another one, and I want to cover this a little more in depth because images are a big focus for Google right now. I was at PubCon Florida, and Gary Esch from Google, to quote him, said, "We threw an unreasonable number of engineers at image search." This is a priority for them. We're starting to see a lot more images showing in the mobile results again. Used to be we would see a lot anyway, but they kind of did away with that. But now they're starting to use it for more things. Things to know about this, the image index is separate from the page index. I'll cover why that's important a little later. You want to allow your images to be indexed typically. I mean, there might be reasons you don't. You can have a sitemap. That's basically a list of all the images on your site to help with crawling, indexing of these. And if you do have a lot of really good images and you don't mind people using them, a really good way to build links to your site is to open up your copyright. Basically do Creative Commons with attribution. It means people will link back to your page where they got this image. You get lots of links. It's pretty great. It helps your links are kind of votes for your site. They help your site rank better. What matters for image optimization? There's a lot of different things. The text around the image, they're taking context of where this is. The content of the image, the content of the page itself, the image name, although that's a very minimal impact, I wouldn't go changing that. But for any future ones, you can actually change the name of the image before you upload them. That is a ranking factor, a small one. The alt attribute, this is basically your chance to define what that image contains. And that's also used by, for instance, screen readers for accessibility purposes. And the web page title and description. Now Google, this is new. They've actually started looking at what the image is and identifying it. These are food. These are specifically fruit. These are apples. So they're actually using a machine learning algorithm to tag these images, to identify what actually is in the image. Before, SEOs used to recommend, no matter what the image was, put your keyword in there. Put your keyword in the alt attribute, put your keyword in the image name. Just make sure your keyword is there. I would say that is 100% a bad practice now. You can actually put an alt attribute on a background image. These are a little different. Typically they're used in, for instance, hero images, headers. They'll have text over them in a lot of cases. But you shouldn't use one for an irrelevant image. You should just call a thing what it is. Like if you have a picture of a tennis ball, it's not I don't know what a good example is that. It's not a t-shirt for tennis or something. Just use whatever the image is. Don't try and make it up. Don't try and stuff your keyword for your page, whatever you're targeting in there. The URL, this is how you actually access the site. So whatever the address is. It's mainly used as an identifier. People put way too much focus on this. This is a very, 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 very tiny ranking factor. People will also tell you that, hey, you should have short URLs. Maybe because it's easier for users, but the actual limit is 2,083 characters. One, I don't want to type that, so that's one reason to use a shorter one. But that's the official limit, and that's not necessarily Google's limit. That's an Internet Explorer limit for anyone that still uses IE. God knows who does that, government probably. And the structure of your site matters more for discovery and crawling, but not necessarily ranking. A lot of people will say, I need this particular folder on my site, like I need my keywords in there. It's such a tiny, tiny factor that that's not usually the case. You really should be paying more attention to taxonomy, ontology work. The analytics is usually a main factor in deciding URLs. You want to keep things short, simple, logical, but it's not a big a factor as a lot of SEOs will make it out to be.
Is it a factor at all?
JR asked, is it a factor at all? It is a tiny factor, tiny, tiny, tiny factor. There are tons of arguments over subdomains, subdirectories for SEO too. Really a lot of that's more, well, there we go. Internal linking. How that is linked. It doesn't really matter if you're in a subdomain like before the main domain, like if it's www whatever site, or if it's cloud.whatever site. That honestly can be changed with a reverse proxy in like 2 minutes. It's really the URLs for Google are more of an identifier than anything right now. They're actually trying to get away from them. One of the founders of Google was like, we want to kill URLs. They've practically stopped showing them on mobile anyway. This is also fun. You can actually animate your URLs with JavaScript. I will share this deck out later so you can go to that link, but it's really cool. This is what I consider the most important ranking factors. Obviously, is the page indexed? Like, is it even available to be returned? How is it indexed? Is it folded with another page? What signals does it share? I'll talk more about that later. The content of the page. This is, if you're going to do one thing, improve your content right now. I'm the tech SEO guy. I'm telling you, improve your content. Answer people's questions. Stop using marketing jargon. And then it comes down to links. There's really over 200 factors that go into the ranking. Some of those have like 50 decision trees kind of that go into it. But I mean, the main three are going to be kind of, is it indexed, then the content and links. Technical content links, that's it. SEO is not that difficult, I promise. It gets overcomplicated. So talking about this, is it indexed, how it's indexed, we're going to cover that pretty in depth. How the signals are consolidated. So are you combining content from multiple pages into one? Are you getting internal links like from your own site and external links from other sites? Are you redirecting your old pages there? Any links to your site you want to consolidate as much as possible, and we're definitely going to cover that. Fewer, stronger pages, that's the ultimate goal. This really comes into play with e-commerce. Some folks will have, 100 different versions of a page for, hey, I have this t-shirt that's extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, extra, extra large, extra, extra, extra large. And then I've got those same things in 50 different colors. Should I have, I don't know how many that is, like 300 pages for that? Or should I have one page with all of those options? In general, the answer is probably going to be one page. There might be a few cases where you could argue for more. I wouldn't necessarily do it. The content we talked about, but it's basically what people search for, what the top pages talk about, what's the language they're using, what are they already ranking for, and then you can look further beyond page level. I think this is actually where a lot of tools kind of fall short, is they look at a page or one query compared, but you could look at your entire competitors, see what content is successful for them, see what is driving them value. It's huge intelligence data. And then the intent, and a lot of times intent gets classified as informational, navigational, transactional. To me, the intent is usually fractured. If you look at a result, it's rarely one thing. It's usually a mixed result. And those results will kind of come back to the buckets around what people are searching for. So if people are searching for, this thing plus a lot of different brands, you're typically going to see like product comparison pages. If it's a thing that's maybe in comparison with something else, you'll see like this versus that as a result. It might be only one or two of the results. It might be lower. You'll probably see some informational results. You may see some actual like product results. There's a lot of different things that go into this, but it's basically, to me, every result I look at comes back to the same thing that people search. Google's trying to show a mix of that. They're trying to fulfill with their results as many intents as possible. Like, these are what people want. Let me show several different options in these mixed intent results. The next part is crawling and indexing. I said the number one thing is indexing, how your page is indexed. Or is it indexed, how it's indexed. Crawling is not the same as indexing. Pages can be crawled, but not indexed. It means Google, Bing, whoever else is actually going to the page, but they may not actually index your page. It may not be relevant enough. It may be that they've got 50 versions of this same page. So they're like, I don't need that one, though. They might fold it with another page in their index. They combine it into what they call clusters. But generally how this works is the crawl will trigger an index as long as everything's okay on the page. But then there's actually a second wave of indexing where they come back and they actually render the pages. This might change in the future. They just upgraded their crawler to a new version of Chrome. And we'll see if they do this in one step in the future. But it's kind of amazing because right now they're rendering almost every page on the internet. That is web scale for sure. And that is really an incredible feat that they can even manage that. So they're processing the page. So you can't use a lot of the tricks that you used to. A lot of JavaScript stuff now, they're actually trying to incorporate into their index. One of the best ways to see how things are being treated by them is the index coverage report in Google Search Console. Links here. Again, I'll share this later. This one has a breakdown of all the different options. So though they have, I think it's over 30 different options of how they treat pages. So sometimes they're folded with other pages. Sometimes they chose a different canonical. Sometimes your page might have a tag on it that prevents it from being indexed. This kind of breaks down everything. And you see, this is not IBM. We have way more pages than this. I did not use that. But the one I pulled here is an e-commerce store. And most of their pages are not valuable for Google. And it's a lot of what I talked about where, you know, they basically have the same item with a bunch of different features and they have pages for all of that. And Google's like, actually index about 3.5 thousand, you're nearly 75,000 pages. The search engines are constantly crawling the web. Googlebot, Bingbot, Yandex, Baidu, if you're do international, there's tons of these. There's tons of smaller search engines also. They find your pages by following links to them, links from other sites to you, links from your site to your site. Sitemaps, we'll talk about that more, but it's basically a list of all pages on your site or all images on your site or videos. There's a bunch of different sitemaps. You can also submit your site, Google Search Console. They have their mobile-friendly test, and they have an indexing API. We'll cover some more of this later. I really love the idea of the indexing API. I will spend way too much time on that. You'll need to stop me. The crawl budget is basically based on the popularity of your site, how often things change, how important your content is deemed. Google will assign basically a value that says, this is how many pages I'm going to crawl each day, and anytime you have lots of additional errors, this is kind of going to go down. Less pages will be crawled, so newer content may not be indexed as fast. Other duplicated content, this happens a lot with hreflang, which is used for internationalization. It's like, I have 20 versions of the same page. Well, to Google, they're like, nah, that's all the same page. I'm not going to crawl through all that. All looks the same to me. When they're rendering, shout out to J.R. Oaks here, he did this test to show the viewport. So it's not, they don't see a site like we see a site. They're using a typical browser, but then they use a really long viewport. And the reason they do that is, one, it's going to show them a lot of content. It's going to show them a lot of the images that are available. They're currently updating this to a newer version of Chrome. This was running Chrome 41 for a long time, which did not have a lot of modern features. They heavily cache files. This is actually one of the reasons they can render at scale, is they're caching your JavaScript, your CSS, all this other stuff, and then basically using their HTML snapshot, which is just basically the code of the page, plus the files that they stored to render this really fast rather than having to wait for all the responses on everything or call these things multiple times. It's one of the tricks that they're doing to get through this. And they run with a sped up clock. So I actually just had a really interesting example I looked into. A lot of people think that JavaScript has a 5-second timeout for them. Like they'll only see whatever's loaded in the first 5 seconds of the site. There was a site that redirected using JavaScript after 30 seconds. It was an acquisition, and they basically waited 30 seconds and then used JavaScript to redirect a user. Google actually respected that. They saw that redirect that happened after 30 seconds. Robots.txt is a file. It's generally domain.com/robots.txt. you can have multiple of these, but it's basically telling bots, good bots anyway, what they're allowed to crawl, what they're allowed to see. There's some best practices. I kind of want to get through some of this, but max size, 500K. You can see old versions of the Robots.txt in archive.org. This has saved me a lot in the past when things were blocked from domain migrations. This is actually a record. Archive.org has a record back to 1996 of a lot of pages on the internet. And so if something happened months ago and someone's like, nah, that didn't happen, like that wasn't blocked, no. You can look back in Robots.txt and say, yeah, it was. Like the current version might not be, but this could have caused issues before SEOs were brought in, for instance. And typically the main thing I see with Robots.txt is it blocks a lot of things. People block things that they probably shouldn't. There's a lot of commands for this. I'm not going to cover this. If you want to download this, you can. I will mention no index. This may go away very soon. They're looking at whether they should support that functionality or not. It's not officially supported, but it's kind of working for now. You do want to do this. Again, I mentioned Google is rendering the web. You should allow all your JavaScript and CSS. Now, that doesn't mean other domains will do this, other scripts or things that you're pulling into your site, but at least on your site, they should have access to pretty much everything. Sitemap files, these are different files, again, that have lists of different things. There's video, there's images, there's page sitemaps, there's news sitemaps. These are not a requirement, but they will help Google to find your pages, find your images, find your videos. They should be automated in almost all cases. If you're on WordPress, you probably have something to do it like Yoast. Older sites run into an issue typically where they're trying to manually run these and they end up out of date really fast. They can actually do more harm than good. If your sitemaps don't have like the most recent versions of your URLs or there's a lot of 404s, the search engines can actually stop trusting these. They're like, I have this page here, and they're like, no you don't. I have this page here, no you don't. And they'll stop looking at them if they're bad enough. These can be in a lot of different versions. The most common is an XML sitemap, but they can actually just be a text file, literally a list of pages. They can be used cross-domain. This is actually one of the most common questions that I get is you can have sitemaps that work on different domains. These are really popular in migrations, for instance, or anytime you have, again, for internationalization, maybe I have a version of the domain for each country. So you can kind of do all this in one as long as they're all verified in the same Search Console account. The URLs that are used in there are a canonicalization signal. We'll talk more about canonicalization a little bit later, but basically these are which version of the page they're going to choose. This is one of many signals that goes into it, but it can impact which one is actually shown. You can include the hreflang, which is used for internationalization here. And you can filter into individual sitemaps that are uploaded to Google Search Console to see actually how the pages are being treated in that particular sitemap. How those pages are being indexed, which ones aren't being indexed. So you can kind of assess the quality of your sitemap. The indexing APIs, I think this will replace sitemaps. Right now they're going to run alongside of it, but this is really interesting because basically you can send, in a similar way to how like caching layers work with servers, when you make a change, it like clears the cache, it goes out, and it goes to your server level cache, your CDN, etc. Or it could be like page, server, CDN. When those signals come out to say this changed, now there are APIs to tell Google and Bing that this changed. Instead of them having to randomly crawl and determine, did this change, did this update, I have to process all this again, or determine, should I crawl this again? These indexing APIs give the websites more control to say, this changed. Please come look at my page. This is going to take a lot of resources off of Google and Bing, so they'll actually be able to process more stuff. They'll be able to process things faster. They'll be able to process things that are important to you, things that you just changed. Then there's the robots directives. These control basically crawling, indexing, a bunch of different things. They can be in the head section, which you typically will have like a head and body section if you look in the HTML of a page, but they can also be in a server response. They're not typically used there, but they can be, which is one of the reasons I mention it. They will be used there for things like PDFs in general, but sometimes pages can have multiple places where these are being loaded and they can give conflicting signals. A no index tag is basically telling Google, do not index this page. There could be reasons for that. Maybe you've got a similar page. Maybe it's another version you don't really want them to crawl about. Maybe it's, you know, a logged in thing. Well, you don't typically need that for that. But typically, Google's going to take the most restrictive settings. So if I have 3 versions that say index and 1 version that says no index, they're going to take the one that says no index and be like, that's what they meant. There's a lot of... What's that? No. The question was that tag going away in the future? I don't think so. What I said might be going away are sitemaps. Because the indexing API, if enough people adopt it, it's a really elegant way to handle crawling of the web. It's a lot less resource intensive, both for like Google, Bing, but also websites. These websites are constantly being crawled by 1,000 different bots. If we tell the bots what they should crawl, when they should crawl, only things that have updated, it actually takes a lot of the resources away from our servers.
Was the question about no index in Robots.txt file versus SAS?
Oh, that's a good point. Jenny, yes, Jenny mentioned that I had mentioned that the no index in robots.txt may be going away. Sorry, I misunderstood. That's not, in the header or the server response, it will be there. I guarantee it for a long time. In robots.txt, they're actually investigating the usage of it because that's never officially been supported. It's kind of been a hacky workaround that worked. It's kind of nice at times to use that, but you know, it's going to be inconsistent between different search engines, whether that's respected. Most people only care about Google, so they will use it. But yeah, they're looking at whether that functionality should be there, because technically robots.txt is meant for how pages are crawled. So an indexing directive there doesn't necessarily make sense. It's been working for years now, but it maybe shouldn't have ever worked. I'm going to skip all this. There's lots of things in there. What's really interesting, this is my favorite part about technical SEO, is there's a lot of signals that add up. And these can be conflicting. So I mentioned crawling is different than indexing. You can mark a page no index, have one of those tags on there, but if it's blocked in robots.txt, that's actually going to get indexed. Google's like, I know there's a page there, someone linked to it. I'm not allowed to crawl it, so they take signals from, say, the links to that page to write a title tag, and they'll have a little message that basically says, no, we can't crawl this. So they don't have a meta description. They actually can't see any of the content on it. They can't take into account like links or anything like that for it. They can't see the no index directive. They're not allowed to crawl to see that. That's why they index it. Server response headers, these are basically telling different bots or browsers how a page is. Like 200, okay, that's a typical response that says, yep, this page is here. Other things, redirects we'll talk about a little more later, but there's 301s which are permanent. They're not really permanent. They go back and check every once in a while, so they're really more like they're cached redirects. So I like to make that distinction. There's 302, temporary. 307, you'll see a lot more now than previously, but these are typically used for something that's for HSTS, which basically says this should be on HTTPS instead of HTTP. This should be a secure site. But this is different because it can actually be used, that's browser side, and in that case, it can be server side also. Server side is more like how the 302 works. When it's browser side, there's typically another redirect beyond there. You just can't see it because your browser's cached it. If you go in like in private incognito or any of the Google tools, you'll actually see a 301 or a 302 there. 308s, they're similar to 301s, and I was trying to think of a good way to describe how this works. If you're in SEO, you're going to see this a lot more now. It's actually a better solution than 301s. It's what I would recommend using now. It doesn't allow switching from post to get, but it has secondary benefits. Like if there's an index of links, for instance, a great example of this is HSTS. Browsers actually store a list of sites that have migrated over that said we're permanently secure. That's stored in the browser. When there's a list like that, if you're using a 308, any kind of database like that, any kind of links on a site even, could technically be updated automatically to the new version. So it wouldn't even have to go through a hop, like a redirect hop, like one version to another version. It's just like, this is the right version, change that in the previous place. It's similar to the difference between 404 not found and 410 gone. 404 is like, I'm not here right now, come back later. 410 is like, I'm done, I'm out, peace. And the difference is 410 is going to drop from the index instantly. 404s will usually drop actually just a day or two. Like it's a very temporary thing that eventually is treated as gone. 418 is a fun one. I'm a teapot. That is the response code for that. What's that? When would you use I'm a teapot? For fun. It's just a really random, I think that actually started as an April Fool's joke and they made it an official standard. And then 500s are typically server errors. There's dozens of these. These are the ones you'll typically run into. Canonical tags. This is meant to solve duplicate content issues. It's like I've got these 50 versions of this page, I should have just one version. It basically lets you set your preferred version of a page. But the reason for doing that is it consolidates signals there. Like if you have 50 versions of a page and like you have one link to each version, that will consolidate those 50 links back to that one singular version. That's the version that's going to show in the index. And there's a lot of reasons you can have duplicate content. This is typically how it looks when it's used in the HTML code. This is used in a header response, which this is another tag that can show up in multiple places that can have conflicting signals. This is actually a suggestion for Google. This is not a directive. This is one of the most common tags where they'll actually ignore things because they think you got this wrong. A lot of sites will have, for instance, just all canonicals pointing back to the home page, or they'll mess up and have, some random thing in the canonical. A lot of tags take precedence over this. The most common one I see is hreflang, which again is for internationalization. Typically, it seems like if there's an order of priority at Google, like canonical is one of the lower ones. But a lot of things will go into determining which is the proper version. Google prefers HTTPS over HTTP. They prefer secure sites. It's a minor ranking factor. Shorter URLs over longer URLs. This actually wouldn't be needed. If we had one version of every page on the internet, we wouldn't need this at all. It didn't exist till, 11, 12 years ago now. So it was meant to solve a lot of issues because people started bloating their index. They're like, you have 50 versions of that, I only want one. Eventually their systems learn like, hey, these 49 other versions I don't need, I can crawl them less. Like you're telling me this is the main version, that's the one I'll crawl and update more often. They don't work in the body section of a site. I mentioned you typically have head, body, sometimes footer. It's not really used that much anymore. But canonicals can be in the header. What happens when a canonical is thrown in a body, and this can happen if, say, there's an iframe in the head. Iframe is basically another page pulled in to the page, but people kind of misuse it. It can break the head section early and throw other important tags into the body. I've realized a lot of people don't know how to troubleshoot this when it happens. I'm not going to explain this here, but if you look up DOM breakpoints, you basically get to step through the document object model as it's being built and say, what is happening? When this break happens, you know what broke it. It's the previous step. It's typically going to be an iframe, but sometimes JavaScript can do weird things too. Canonicalization is their process. This is different than the tags. This is basically them trying to figure out from all these different signals, which is my preferred version. Some of those can cause other signals to be shared, like links, internal, external links on your site, also between sites, which is something that is not officially supported, but it does happen. So one of the things I've seen is content syndication, like you're sending your content out to other websites. You're sending duplicate versions of your site. Even if they don't do content syndication correctly, they should actually canonical back to you or link back, but a lot of sites don't do that. They're like, no, it's my content now, I'm using that. They can still be folded back with your page in the index. They're in the same cluster as you, which means all their signals, all their internal links, all their external links will actually count for your site now. So if someone steals your content, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But these are all things that go into it. Like they look at canonical tags, hreflang, the different duplicate versions. They look at sitemap URLs. They look at how you're linking to these pages internally. They look at how you've redirected pages on your site. And they try and determine what is the right version. What is the one source of truth that I want to show in my index? Then there's duplicate content. This is basically when you copy and paste a site. It's not an issue. A lot of SEOs will tell you this is a penalty. This is the worst thing ever. Again, I just gave you a use case with content syndication that says, yeah, please steal my content. That's going to get me links. Gary Eish from Google recently, this year, put this as, don't be afraid of duplicate content. It's the internet, it happens. Google search does not penalize for duplicate content. What they'll typically do is filter it out or fold it together, which means they'll either treat it separately, but will try and show the one source of truth, or they'll just not, they'll have the one source of truth that says everything gets consolidated here. This is the one page that shows. And there's a lot of reasons why you can have duplicate content. I won't cover all that, but there's a billion reasons why duplicate content exists. What happens? You can do nothing, hope Google gets it right. They do a lot of times. Sometimes they will miss the original source. If, say, I publish something on my small blog and then the New York Times picks it up and they publish it within like 5 minutes of my publishing time, they might determine that's really from the New York Times and not my website. So mistakes do happen with that. They're not all that common, but they can cause some headaches. Canonical tags can help prevent this. Again, this is your one source of truth, redirects. When it's parameterized versions, this is like when there's question something equals whatever. These are other versions of the page, typically used in e-commerce. They used to be used for tracking a lot. They have a tool in Google Search Console that lets you tell them how these should be treated. They can also determine it on their own, like you can leave it as let Googlebot decide. But if there's something that you know that they, or that you think they're getting wrong, you can say, this is how I want you to treat it. Alternate versions for mobile, for different things. I mentioned the syndication. Different tools. I love tools. They give you tons of data. I'll go into why some of that data shouldn't be used on the next slide, but For crawlers, these are things that kind of simulate a bot. These go through your website and say, here's all your pages, here's a bunch of information about them. So they'll tell you your title, your meta description, your heading tags. Some of them will return full content of your page, a bunch of different things, different header responses. Basically all the information about each page that they see. Deep crawl, Botify, on crawl, those are more like cloud-based, right? Screaming Frog and Sitebulb are typically a lot cheaper. I think Screaming Frog is free up to like 500 URLs even. Content King, they're really cool because they're in the second one too because they do a lot of change monitoring on your site. So if your redirect for whatever reason gets taken down or you changed all this stuff, they tell you exactly what changed on your page. If you're not the only one working on the site, this is a great source of information because sometimes things happen that it might be at the server level, it might be someone else did it. It's a good way to know what happened. There's also Page Modified, Little Warden handle a lot of that stuff. For Chrome, I like either a Yima's redirect path or a link redirect trace. This will show you the header responses that I talked about, but it's full responses, which can have a lot of information about the server. I use this a lot when troubleshooting redirect issues. If there's multiple hops, it tells me, usually in the server responses, I can identify which one fired it by what else is there. Which one fired a redirect from where. But it'll also show the hops that are being followed. If there's a redirect chain from like one page to another. Some sites, they change their whole URL structure every year. And this is a good way to tell like how that's being followed. I use Tag Assistant, Telium tools. These are more for analytics and tracking tags typically, but it's a good way to see what's firing, what's not. And Chrome has a built-in feature called DevTools also. Google has some tools to show you exactly what they see. They have their mobile friendly test. That's basically what they see for the mobile version of your site. The Search Console URL Inspector also will show you like a visual representation plus the returned HTML code. That can be desktop or mobile. It'll actually tell you which one it is. It depends on if your site has switched to the mobile first index or you're still on the desktop index. We don't know specifically what that split is, but it's probably like 60% mobile, 40% desktop now. I'm making those numbers up. And the rich results test is still their desktop testing tool. One of the reasons I am having a problem with SEO tools right now is they're not evolving. And I'm calling them out multiple times. They have a lot of things that waste people's time. These are businesses that are paying for fixes that don't do anything. These are SEOs that are recommending fixes that don't do anything. There's a lot of things here. Like people will say your page is too big. Well, Google says keep it under a couple hundred megabytes. That's a huge page. Now you might have some issues with page speed if you're loading that, but they'll process it. Too many links. I read a recent article on Search Engine Land. It's like, oh yeah, every SEO recommends less than 100 links on a page. No, we do not. A few thousand at most. That's what Google will process. Missing sitemap, not a problem. They can still crawl the web. Missing robots.txt, again, that basically means, hey, we can do whatever we want on your site. Doesn't have to be there. Doesn't have to be checked. I'm not saying these aren't best practices, but they're not problems either, not necessarily problems. Custom 404 always gets me, who cares? That's, hey, you hit an error page, okay. Why does that need to be custom? As long as it says you got an error. I'll tell you actually, if you have some text on your page that says like not found or 404 not found, even if the response code from the server is wrong, Google will typically treat that as an error page still. Title tags, yes.
So I was going to ask you about the page size because I can understand Google will reward or penalize you for page speed, right? So your page size influence that. You're saying it's not consistent with that?
So the question's about page speed and will Google reward or penalize you for that? In a sense, yes. it's a very minor thing. They don't necessarily reward anyone for it. In fact, I don't think there's any promotion of any kind for that. It's typically only if your site is really slow that they will kind of knock you down, and it's very minor for the most part. Unless you're egregiously slow, like, hey, your page takes 20 seconds for me to load on my desktop, you won't see a difference in your search results. It is a factor. I'll actually, if I have time, I don't know, like, if people want to stay after. I have some stuff on SiteSpeed I can show. I can talk to that. But title tags too long, too short. I can't tell you how many agencies I've spent, hours on someone's time to like fix this stuff. It's really going to have such a little impact. It's the what is it, the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. Like, if your page doesn't even have traffic, why am I changing that title tag? Like, is that really going to have an impact? Great, no one's going to see that title tag that I wrote. So you really have to think about like being smart about some of this stuff. I won't go into all this, but yeah, there's a lot of things in these tools that lead people to waste time because they really are lacking the understanding. They're not looking at the full picture. They're still using outdated information. I think a lot of agencies like them because they're like, all this, you have 1 million errors. Okay, how do I prioritize that? Are those really a problem? Like, those are the questions they need to be answering. There's a lot of ways to troubleshoot some of the indexing issues I'm going to cover. If you paste your URL into Google, well, I'm going to go back 1 second. They killed this command, info. I might have been the only person to use this. I love that command. It showed me the canonicalized version, which we talked about canonicalization. This is the one source of truth. No matter what page I put this on, it shows me how this is indexed. So if I put this on a page that was redirected, if I put this on a page that was folded because of duplicate content, it will show me the right version of the page that Google is going to show, where they're consolidating all the signals to. And then they killed it. There's another system that's similar. It's not the exact same system. But typically, if you paste the URL into Google, I pasted Stox SEO. Stox SEO has a canonical inserted with JavaScript, which they said didn't work for a while. I proved it did, whatever. But it shows the result as patrickstox.com. It's a very similar system to how info command worked. It will typically show me the first one will be kind of the source of truth. It's not as exact as info was, though. You can also ask for the cache. So I actually asked for the cache on the USEN homepage, and it gives me IBM.com. The reason for this is we used a 302 redirect. It keeps signals at the original URL. So this is, if you search for IBM, this is what shows up in search results. So I'm asking, about this other page, and it's like, this is your source of truth. This is the one that we index. This is the one we show people. This is where all the signals like links and everything consolidate. There's the URL inspector in Google. I ran this on Stox SEO again. It's telling me it's not on Google. There's another page with a proper canonical tag. It's telling me down here what that page is. So it's again, like just another way to troubleshoot these indexing issues. Site command will show you whatever you ask for. This is a little different. This is what a lot of SEOs will recommend. Like, is your page indexed? Use a site command. Technically, yes, maybe indexed, not eligible to be returned would be a better description. They know about it. They've combined signals with this other page. It's there, but you'll never see it in a search result without using that site command. Then this is fun. Search engines actually fix a lot of things on their end for you. I don't think a lot of SEOs realize that. I will be doing a whole presentation on this at SMX Advanced coming up in June if anyone is going there. I know Jenny is. I will be covering a lot of the things that they're fixing on their end. Whoop. You okay? Good. Okay. Move that way a little more. I'm a little scared. But this is, to me, one of the most interesting things that people haven't put this puzzle together yet. Google's seeing the same thing wrong on 1 million sites, on 10 million sites. You think they're just going to leave that wrong? No, and Bing does the same thing. Bing is actually fixing a lot of stuff on their end too. So some things that are best practices may not be how things actually work. I talked about redirects a little bit, taking bots and users from one page to another. This is really about consolidation of signals. It tells how things are working, and I'm going to cover this a little bit and then probably stop. So, but this is important to know because a lot of times, like, I don't think SEOs know how redirects work. They've had this wrong for years. There's still arguments about this, whether there's a decay of signals, like, you know, there's an old thing that said, oh, redirects lose 15% per hop. Like each time something gets redirected, it loses 15%. Or that they don't pass, or that they don't pass a certain amount, that canonicals or JavaScript redirects don't pass, or they pass less than 301s, 302s, that 301 versus 302, like, you know, a lot of people are like 302s don't pass anything. There's a lot of myths around this, but basically every way you can redirect, for the most part, I won't say this is 100% true, but pretty much any way you do it is going to consolidate to somewhere else.
They still won't follow a meta refresh.
They do.
What?
Meta refresh 0. They will follow a meta refresh. Yes. Yes. Again, the question was, will they follow a meta refresh with a time on it? I'm going to say yes, because they're basically a browser right now. They won't originally when they're processing the page, but when they go through that second wave of indexing and actually process the entire page, the browser that they use actually does see that and they do respect it. With redirects, you want to map one-to-one as much as possible. Like this page is now this page. A lot of times people will say that, you know, redirect everything to my home page. Great, all the signals for blue widget just consolidated to purple, I don't know. Whatever your home page is. So it can consolidate things incorrectly.
Exactly. With 301s and 302s, is there a difference at all?
I will cover that in a second. You also can't forget things like images, PDFs. PDFs are typically traded just like pages. Images, they're a separate index. You do want to maintain redirects from previous versions of your site. You can look in different tools like Ahrefs or Majestic, Moz, see which ones have links. You can look in your server logs, see which pages are still getting traffic. Basically, links and or traffic from users, you probably want them redirected.
What might you use to figure out what to redirect it to?
What might you use to figure out what to redirect it to? What was that page about? And Google that with a site colon. Jared says archives. Are you just, in that case, like the web archive, maybe you didn't know what the previous page was about? Yeah, in that case, yeah, you can look on the Internet Archive again, web.archive.org, and see what content was there and match that to newer content on your website. One of the things that I think SEOs get wrong is that when a page 404s, they think if they redirect it, then the signals are back. Those signals have been dropped completely from Google at that point. Remember, this 404, this can drop fast, like a day or two. All the signals, all the links that went there are gone at that point. When you redirect, that won't have an immediate impact. It's only when they go back and reprocess the links to that previous page that they'll actually pass that value. If you're redirecting, this can be pretty quick. If your site's stable, you're not changing a bunch of stuff, you're not, using a different CMS system every week, it's going to be typically a few weeks before the permanent consolidation kind of happens, semi-permanent. When that happens, though, the original URL, the one you redirected, are dropped completely. This is another thing where SEOs don't quite understand this process. I talked with Gary Esch about a lot of this, so this isn't me making this stuff up, I promise. I did an AMA back in February on the Tech SEO subreddit, and one of my big takeaways was we don't know how redirects work. So I grilled him for like 2 hours trying to figure this out. The signals consolidate to the new URL. The signals that the original are dropped. A lot of times people will go back and change the original redirect to go somewhere else, like they pointed it somewhere temporarily, even though they used the 301. And when that happens, the original URL, they're gone. They can be built back up over time, again, when the links to the page are crawled. JR's question, 301s versus 302s. This is all about how things are consolidated. 301, they're like, yep, this page goes to the new page. Simple as that. 302s work more like a reverse redirect. They actually take the signals from the new page and they bring it back to the original page for a while. So it like reverse canonicalizes backwards. Because the page it's going to show is the one that you redirected from. That's what you asked. This is meant to be temporary. If you leave it in place long enough, they swap this. They're like, that 302, that temporary redirect has been in place for like 3 months. That's not temporary anymore. So there will be a period of time where they swap and take the signals to the new URL instead. That's one of the things where they're fixing things on your end. You use this temporary redirect for months. They're like, that's not temporary. Then other signals too can come into play. It's more complicated. I won't cover that. Did that answer your question, JR?
Yeah, I mean,
you don't believe it. I know. Go test it. Any page that's out there.
yeah, I think it's quicker than that because, and obviously they respect that for A/B testing. That's what the recommendation is for A/B testing. But we've seen shit transfer over.
Oh yeah, if your site's more stable, it can transfer a lot faster. It could be days. It could be weeks, it could be months. There's a lot of factors that go into how fast that goes over. But a lot of time, I didn't really cover that, but I think the most common thing SEOs believe for this 302 is that both pages have signals and both pages can show, and that's simply not true. It hasn't been true in a long time. If you redirect all your stuff to one page, the signals may not consolidate correctly. If this page is the same as this other page, yeah, that's fine. If I'm redirecting everything to my home page or something that's not relevant, it may not consolidate correctly. You might actually just be losing the links because you killed off content and you're like, I'm going to redirect that to my home page or to this category page in e-commerce. But if it's not really relevant, they may not respect it. Legacy redirects from previous versions of your site, these may no longer consolidate. It depends like how many hops, how these have been gone. Like all the different signals for this are checked at the time of the crawl. So if these things no longer link to you, like if you have a link from, I'm going to use Forbes.com. Well, that may not count anyway. Google ignores a lot of links from bigger sites that they think have been abused. But let's say you have a link from Forbes. If that goes to a page that no longer redirects. If they recrawl Forbes and see that like now that page on your site is a Forbes page, that will no longer consolidate to the new version of the page. So it's kind of important to keep these legacy redirects in place. I will keep them all until the day I die.
Is that an argument to go back and get all of your old links changed?
Jake asked, is that an argument to go back and get all of your old links changed? I would say yes for the most part. I know that they will at least do a 10-year look back. Now, your website, other people's websites change over time. The links that you reclaim may not be as valuable as they once were. They might also see this has been gone for a while. They may not recrawl that page for 2 years because, hey, it's been the same page for the past 10 years. So Google may not check it very often, but sometimes they'll go back and check stuff that's almost 20 years old. Yes?
This is obvious, but what if you're moving to WordPress from HTML? Do you have to redirect all your pages?
If you're moving
from Word to WordPress from HTML, you have to redirect all your pages.
if you're moving from straight HTML to WordPress, should you redirect your pages? Yes. You could prioritize, again, if you have access to like Ahrefs or Majestic, SEMrush, Moz, they'll tell you like how many links are to each one. If you look at your server logs, you can see how much traffic, or Google Analytics will tell you like how much traffic's still going to those pages. If people are still going there or there are links there, you want to redirect them, yes. I mentioned this earlier, the image index is separate from a page index. A lot of times when people are migrating, they'll redirect images to a page. This doesn't actually transfer signals. For Google, that image was not ever in the page index, which is what they're looking for the links. So because it's not there, just because you redirected it doesn't mean those signals will transfer. They're not actually seen. And redirects can happen at a lot of different levels. I'm not really going to cover that. I want to leave a little time for questions, wrap it up. This is probably my favorite report of any SEO tool that exists. Ahrefs Best by Links report. This tells you which pages on your site have links. And you can sort by different status codes. So you can say 404, these are error pages that have links, redirect those. Easy win. If you're at an agency, this is one of the easiest wins you will ever have, one of the easiest things to clean up. You can also look to see if it's redirecting to not necessarily relevant pages. So if it's a bunch of stuff redirecting to your home page or a category page or something, and you have a better location for that, you can fix that. Again, they won't be counted until the links to pages are recrawled by Google, which might take some time, but they will count eventually. We talked a bit about site speed, but I'm going to wrap this up here. There's a lot of cool tools for site speed, page speed insights, web page test, the Chrome user experience report. Data from this is actually coming to Google Search Console, so you'll be able to see this for pages on your site that have data for it. But you can kind of get it right now from either a BigQuery database at an origin level, like the domain level. Individual pages, you can get that data through page speed insights. If it shows you anything at the top about like real world metrics, you'll see the data from Crux there. If you want to, what do I think about GT metrics? That's okay. You can say the same for Pingdom. I really like page speed insights. This is actually backed by Lighthouse. Lighthouse is actually built into Chrome's browser. I don't typically use Lighthouse within Chrome because any extensions you have, there's a bunch of caveats that can impact your results. Page speed insights is going to be fairly consistent with that stuff, a lot more than, what is my home's internet connection, what is my CPU speed, like there's a lot of factors. If you run it on 2 different machines, you're going to get different results. If you want to do real user monitoring of your own, there's a lot of options. Boomerang is pretty popular now, New Relic. I think they just released one for apps today in Firebase, or yesterday.
Did you see the beta in GSC?
I mentioned that, soon GSC. Jenny's talking about the beta in GSC. That is pulling the page level real user monitoring data from the Chrome user experience report. This is people that use Chrome that opted to share their information. And it's pretty great. It's one of the only sources of this kind of data. And the scale that they do it is pretty incredible.
And it's already available.
It's already available, yes. One of the best reasons for site speed, 1, your site is faster. People like it better. They don't leave it as much. But 2, your analytics. A lot of times, analytics, if you have a lot of stuff early on in your load, analytics might not fire for several seconds. If someone leaves during that time, they may not ever even be recorded. So you'll see this with paid campaigns a lot. They typically use a metric like click-to-visit ratio. Like, here's how many people clicked my ads versus how many actually visited my site, which is really more how many people were recorded on my site. But if this is really, if that metric is really low, it's probably that your site is slow and your analytics isn't firing early enough to actually record the folks. And I'm going to leave off there for any additional questions. There's like a billion more slides here, by the way. No.
Is it available anywhere?
It will be. I will put it up. So there's a bunch of different stuff. Some of it I didn't actually fill out because I knew I would never get to it. Others have notes or links. Yes, there was a section for middleware. Maybe. This is,
We'll put up the revised edition.
I realized how hard this was. There's so much involved in technical SEO that I could spend a whole day talking about this. I tried to be brief. I'm sorry if I'm long-winded, but I tried to be brief on a lot of this stuff and pull out things that mattered.
Patrick, post the original set, and every week, so that this meetup gets people coming back to their site, post another page.
I don't think anyone's going to check that every week.
Well, you want to take some questions?
Yeah, any questions? Yes, Chris.
So, what are your thoughts on content hubs as essentially an effective SEO practice?
So the question is about content hubs being used for SEO. I would say that is going to be a lot more common going forward. Even popular CMS systems like WordPress, like Drupal, they're trending to be decoupled, which means, I'm trying to think of a good way to describe that. The content is separate from the render environment. Like what is actually serving the thing is different than the source of data for the content. The reason they're doing that is partially because of the rise of JavaScript frameworks. That's a slide in here, some presentations about that. But things like React, Angular, Vue, Ember, like these frameworks are better. They're problematic, but they have a lot more control than you have with strictly HTML. So CMS systems, WordPress, Drupal. We're starting to see things switch over. Gutenberg in WordPress is actually built in React if you like that editor. Next year or so if the front end is not done in React also. So I would say that's something that's just going to happen. Basically where you're storing your content in a database becomes either like a JSON response or an API query. And it's basically calling the content into another system at that point. But the reason they're doing that is because these frameworks for the front end have a lot of benefits that are helping. They also can be problematic for things like rendering. Yes?
So a lot of sites, international sites, right? Like Nike.
You want to speak into the microphone because I get a feeling this is going to be
It's going to be long-winded.
do a duet.
I was doing so good.
A lot of international sites like Nike,
Speaking to the IBM.
IBM, etc. You probably know from IBM in like Chrome User Experience Reporter, like 95% 4G, right? And like Google's big push over the last 2 or 3 years has been speed to make sure that users get a good experience on the web, right? And their testing tools for speed are over 3G, right? So do you feel like the speed focus of Google is more for users or more so that their crawlers and renderers can be efficient?
I'm going to go with both on that. The most recent study still says 40% of connections worldwide are 2G. If you have like T-Mobile, you go to Europe, your connection's 2G still. But he mentioned IBMs. I've seen the data for that. No, not all of our stuff is 4G whatsoever. Yes, we have a lot of traffic in like China and India. Just globally, we operate in over 170 countries, and the connections are typically slow. They're not that fast. So they're doing it. Yes, 1, it's better for the web. 2, it's better for them. 3, it's better for users. So they're pushing this. You mentioned that that their testing tools are 3G. They technically classify that now as a fast 4G or a slow 4G connection rather than fast 3G. So they changed the wording on that, I think, to help people understand, like, even a 4G connection can be that slow. Yes, one of you two, I don't care.
I'm taller. Yes. HTTP2.
HTTP2, there's a slide here also for that I did not get to. I don't know, what do you want to know about that? It's faster, it's great, there's some great options in there, like server push.
How do you balance that Google doesn't crawl using it with the positive
They, okay, so the questions around how, like Google doesn't use HTTP2 in their crawling. They use 1.1 still. They don't need to, because the way their rendering engine works, when they're rendering the page, which is when that would be most effective, like when they're taking the HTML snapshot part in the initial hit, doesn't really matter what's there. It's literally a download of the code. When they go back for the resources, they don't actually need HTTP2. Because HTTP2 has like what lets you download a bunch of stuff at the same time, basically. For them, they've already had those files. They hit it once, they cache it on their end. When they go to run people's pages, they basically use that same cached file for rendering a bunch of different pages. So they don't actually need to download the requests each time. They already have that one cached version. So for them, the reason they probably haven't switched is there's not really a benefit, I would say. Yes?
You said earlier duplicate content doesn't have penalties associated with it. Were you talking about all on the same site duplicate or duplicate content on multiple websites?
No, cross-site. There can be so the question's about duplicate content and whether there can be like cross-site penalties. If your site is nothing but other people's contents, yeah, you could get penalized for that. But in general, most instances of duplicate content are not, what's the right word for this? They're not malicious, I would say. So Google handles it fine.
But it creates other kinds of problems.
It can create other problems. Again, like probably the worst case scenario is that another site shows instead of yours for your content. It's fairly rare. They do a pretty good job of determining the original.
Second worst case is faceted navigation.
Second worst case is faceted navigation. I'm a big fan of fewer, stronger pages. I really think a lot of e-commerce sites, they overdo it. They look at like, I've got these 500 different options of things or 5,000 different combinations, and they'll be like, I want to make pages for my top 50 by search volume. And honestly, they're shooting themselves in the foot. If they had one page with all that stuff that was stronger, they'd probably have better results. Here, use the mic, since you're here.
So when there is variation like best laptops under 300, 500, or even best laptops, cheap laptops, and
She works at Lenovo.
so yeah, when that happens and people are really, really trying to get individual pages for these, what do you think?
Maybe. In that case, a lot of the queries are probably branded anyway for those particular pages. If they're looking for different model numbers, yeah, you could have. Well, you could do one for the series, or you could do the individual models. It's less of an impact on that because I have a feeling those pages don't rank for both the branded and unbranded queries. It's probably going to be like your category pages that rank for laptops in general, not an individual laptop page. Is that right? Yeah.
Which is for non-random queries. So it's like we're going up against like review sites and editorial sites. So how do you? And Google itself.
If you're going up against review sites and editorial sites, your one page in that case is probably not as good of an answer as that editorial site or that review site that has dozens of options. People don't really think about that objectively, but if they're like, I want my one product page to rank instead of this thing that lists like 50 different options and has all these breakdowns and customer reviews and testimonials and pros, cons of each thing. Which is the better answer for a user? Just stop and think for a second.
Talk about important things in SEO.
What's that?
Talk about that slide
Important things, yeah. Internal links. This is overlooked a lot. A lot of times people will spend time building links externally, doing outreach, doing spammy things. Internal links are great, and typically, I'm not gonna say go do this on like every single page, but a lot of times there's like an architectural way of doing this. So if you're moving to WordPress, look up a plugin called YARP. It was actually off the plugin store for a while, but now it's back. It's yet another related post plugin. So if you write a bunch of blogs, it's basically looking at the content on your pages and your blogs and saying, here are the most related pages. And it puts in a little thing that has like links to 3 or 4, then pulls in the thumbnails and everything. It's a great way to get a bunch of relevant internal links on like every page on your website. They're interested in this. They might also be interested in this other thing that's absolutely 100% related. It can be an easy win. Breadcrumbs are another reason like internal links work well. Like anytime your menu, your navigation, your footer, there's a lot of ways to do this structurally without having to go one by one through the content. Now, if you want to do it in the content too, absolutely. But I would say again, like the Pareto principle, 80-20 rule. There's certain pages where I probably want to do that. Or if I got a new launch I really want to focus on, I want to every opportunity I have on my site, I want to link over there that's relevant.
But don't overdo it.
Jenny says don't overdo it. I actually don't agree with that. I fully respect Jenny, but I will say I've never seen any issue from overdoing internal links. And Gary Eash has commented on that actually. I will send that to you, but he said it's not a problem. I know. I really respect Jenny. I feel like very self-conscious right now. So.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Just going to go back to the sponsors one more time. If you guys don't mind, again, we have Ecom Integrate. He's helping us down the back there. And of course, Adapt Partners and Go Fish Digital. They're the ones who are leading us with a few extra tickets, so let's give them a big round of applause.
Woo!
We will see you next month, and don't forget about the SEO conference next week. Again, SEO meetup is the $50 coupon code, right?
Who is next month?
What?
Who is next month?
Oh, next month? I don't know who's next month. Is it Jenny? Our very own Jenny House. Thank you.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting that.